Welcome back to Never Enough Novels. It is time to dive into my short and sweet reviews of everything that I read during the month. For August, I read a total of 10 books, so we're going to be going through each and every one of them, and I'll give you my star rating and a quick summary of what I thought. I like to share every single book that I read, whether I liked it or didn't like it, just so that you guys can get a good idea of which books are for you or which books you might want to skip. All of these books are linked down below, so if you do find one that you absolutely want to try, make sure you buy it from Amazon and you'll help support this channel. Plus, hit that like and subscribe button so that you can see these videos in the future. Up first is going to be Not Another Love Song by Julie Soto. Thank you to Forever Publishing for sending me a copy of this book to read ahead of time. I adored her last book, Forget Me Not, and this one was another hit as well. I gave it 4.5 stars. It features a female violinist and a male cellist, and the tension between these two was phenomenal. I'm not normally a huge fan of books about like musicians or rock stars or that sort of thing, but the dive into the world of classical music and the enemies to lovers trope with these two was wonderful. My next book was another 4.5-star read, and this is Close Knit by Jenny Colgan. She is just one of my go-to authors. I can absolutely count on her all the time for just cozy, adorable, sweet romances, and this was no exception. In Close Knit, we head to another small town in Scotland, and our main character is Gertie, who has been living with her mother and her grandmother her whole life, and she's very involved in their like knitting circle and the community, but she's ready for a new adventure. So when she takes a job with the very tiny local airline, she gets to explore some new things for her and discover that she might just be interested in the world outside of her tiny little town. Keeping up with the theme, I have another 4.5-star read, which was Savor It by Tara DeWitt. This was my first book by this author, and it was nothing revolutionary, but just a really well-written romance. I love that it was kind of the opposite of the normal small-town romances because our male main character was kind of the big city guy who ends up moving to a small town and falls in love with like the wonderful neighbors, and he ends up meeting his kind of quirky and adorable next-door neighbor and falls in love with her too. Plus, he is a chef, which is just such a fun type of character to read about, and he's going through this sort of crisis of identity. So I just loved that spin on normally it's like a big city woman falls in love with a small town guy. So this was a little bit different, and again, just a really solidly written romance. And then I have a book called Unwanted by Mia Sheridan. I think I found this on Kindle Unlimited, so it might be available there for free if you have that subscription. But this one is like a mix of mystery and romance. And I ultimately ended up giving it 3 stars. The story starts off with a young boy who is dropped into the woods and basically left to fend for himself. And then we switch to present day where there's been a murder, and the only person nearby who might have any idea about what happened is this like wild man from the forest. So he's brought in to help with the investigation, and he sort of forms a connection with a local guide who is also assisting with this situation. So there's like a romance between those two, but we're also getting the story of this boy mixed in as well as he's surviving in the woods, and kind of all of these things collide into this one like bigger moment and revealed at the end of the book. So this is like a mystery, but it's also like a pretty spicy romance, and at times it was just like really cheesy and kind of cringy. So it wasn't bad. It's just one of those like mediocre romances. That's why I gave it 3 stars. Next up is another romance called We Could Be So Good by Kat Sebastian. This popped up on my radar because I actually want to read the sequel, which is a baseball romance, but I figured I would start with the first book. It's set in the like 1950s and features 2 male reporters. So this is a male-male romance. And I listened to it on audiobook, and I loved kind of that old-timey vibe and the accents they were using. This was a really cute romance, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. Then we'll switch to my first thriller of the month, which was Everyone is Watching by Heather Gudenkauf. So I was originally intrigued by this because it's got a reality show type setting, and I am just an absolute sucker for those. In this book, there were a couple contestants that were selected to compete in this reality show where basically they have to get through a series of obstacles or challenges in order to win an enormous cash prize. But the situation starts to get pretty brutal, and the contestants are turning on each other. There's actual like physical danger involved as well. And they start to realize that they might not have been picked randomly, but there is actually some sort of connection running between all of the contestants. This kept my attention, so I ultimately gave it 4 stars. It wasn't my favorite thriller ever, but it was a pretty entertaining read. That brings me to one of my favorite books of 2024 so far, which is Worst Case Scenario by TJ Newman. A huge thank you to Crown Publishing for sending this my way. I absolutely adore this author and everything she has written, so I had super high hopes for this book, and it completely delivered. This was an easy 5-star rating. It features a plane that crashes into a nuclear power plant and sets off this series of dire consequences if they cannot get the situation under control. The story is told from different perspectives of people that are involved in the disaster. So whether it's like workers at the nuclear power plant or emergency personnel that are dealing with like the fallout of the plane crash in other parts of the town, as well as people who are trying to evacuate those who are local. And it's got so much heart and sacrifice and just an absolutely engaging, fast-paced read that I guarantee you're going to love. Switching back to romance, my next book is Elizabeth of East Hampton by Audrey Bellezza and Emily Harding. This is a writing duo who tackles Jane Austen adaptations, so this one is a retelling of the Pride and Prejudice story. In this case, Elizabeth lives in East Hampton with her family, and she is helping to run the family bakery when two rich city boys come by for the summer and set off a chain of events that follows our very familiar Pride and Prejudice story. This is full of like fresh and updated nods to the original novel, which any Pride and Prejudice fan is just going to absolutely love. I gave it 4 stars. My next book is Night Watching by Tracy Sierra. This was actually Jimmy Fallon's book club pick, I think for like the summer, and that's how I originally found out about it. And I took forever to start reading it because I was so scared that I was not going to be able to sleep at night after I started reading this book. It basically kicks off right away with like a mom at night realizing that there is a man in her house who she doesn't know, and she grabs her children and goes to hide in the house. And over the course of the story, we get kind of the mom's inner dialogue as well as some influence from the police and people that are around her that are making like you as the reader question what actually happened that night and whether this threat that she thought was in the house was real. That aspect that the mom turns into sort of an unreliable narrator makes the story a little bit less scary. So if you're worried about this one, it does kind of pull back from that intensity, so it's not terrifying like the whole way through by any means. And overall, I gave this 4 stars. It did drag in the middle a little bit as we were kind of getting the mom's backstory and trying to figure out what happened that night. But then the last few chapters picked up like crazy and were really intense and exciting and just like a wild ride toward the end. And finally, we're on to book number 10, which is Bridesmaid Undercover by Megan Quinn. I think this book made me laugh out loud more than any other book I've read this year. It is full of hilarious banter and just self-deprecating humor that I just adored. So I gave this 4 stars. Our main character, Everly, is helping to plan a wedding for Hardy's friends, and Hardy gets her to agree to help him win over the maid of honor. So these two set off on sort of a series of misadventures as they're trying to get the maid of honor to take Hardy back. But ultimately, Hardy and Everly start to develop something of their own as well and realize what's right in front of them might be what's actually best for them. This is a spicy romance, and it was just a ton of fun, and I gave it 4 stars. That wraps up all 10 books that I read in August. I love sharing these short and sweet reviews with you. If you want to see what I read in July, you can head over to that video right here.